Association football in the United States is problematic, to put it mildly. Major League Soccer is basically the equivalent of AA baseball in the world football context. Sure, it's professional, but it's lacking in a lot. Now, I love researching the history of these sports, and as I've dug through the history of American soccer, I found 5 general mistakes that have really stunted its growth over time. And so I bring to you the 5 deadly sins of American soccer. Number 1, starting from the top. America has a long-standing habit of trying to import its soccer stars. The Scottish Football Association took steps to deal with the so-called American menace back in the 1920s. This was 70 years before the famous Bosman ruling. Aggressive clubs from the American Soccer League were signing European star players at the end of their contract, giving them pay raises, and convincing them to immigrate to the United States to play. Okay, looking back, it's a little bit strange to see all of this outcry in the old newspapers, especially because of how common it is these days for players to sign on free transfers like that. But you have to realize that many of the men who own professional sports teams in the United States were already used to this sort of thing. Baseball's short-lived Federal League made a name for itself by encouraging star players to skip out on contracts back in 1914 and 1915. As you can guess, that caused all sorts of legal headaches. Earlier, the American League turned itself into a major league in baseball by dishonoring existing player contracts and throwing money around aggressively. The men behind the American Soccer League teams knew exactly what to do. They had experience with this sort of thing. Now, this uproar came during the 1920s. This was during a time when soccer was actually the second most popular sport in the United States. I know it sounds strange, but it's true. The American Soccer League was big business. In contrast, the National Football League was played in a bunch of small podunk Midwest towns. The greatest ASL stars were foreign imports. Archie Stark, for example, was born in Glasgow, though he had immigrated to New Jersey at age 13. Now, the truth is that there was a strong youth soccer culture at that time, as you can see in this Baltimore Sports Sun section from 1925. This was all in just one city. United States soccer seems to go through a reinvention process every couple of generations. The American Soccer League fell apart after the famous soccer wars and then the Great Depression. There were still semi-professional teams that lasted into the 50s, 60s, and in some cases even beyond, and believe it or not, they still drew a crowd. But nobody cared about the Challenge Cup or the smaller, poorer semi-professional version of the American Soccer League. Now, in 1966, the World Cup final was broadcast on tape delay on NBC. It drew a really large audience. And that got the television networks thinking again about potentially turning soccer into a major professional sport in the United States. Actually, my research indicates that there's always been demand in America for soccer. Friendly matches that featured European or South American clubs in touring the United States, playing against local semi-pro all-star teams, tended to attract large crowds. And we're talking about big cities: Baltimore, St. Louis, Boston, Brooklyn, Philadelphia, Los Angeles. Soccer was only a foreign sport because those who controlled the American sports media labeled it as foreign. But nobody at the time seemed to really grasp that. Well, instead of trying to grow the American Soccer League into another major league, CBS Television decided to sign a deal with a brand new league. This was the National Professional Soccer League. This was a 10-team league that featured all new teams and plenty of imported foreign players. Another league was formed to compete with this NPSL. This league was the United Soccer Association, the USA. However, the USA technically didn't field any local teams. It consisted of entire teams imported and rebranded, playing what was essentially a 12-game season of friendlies. The two leagues eventually merged to form the NASL, which also placed a heavy emphasis on importing players from abroad. With today's Major League Soccer, the century-old habit of paying top dollar for imported foreign stars continues. Okay, there's nothing wrong with signing foreign players. However, it must have felt like a real kick to the teeth to all of those semi-pro players and the smaller clubs that already existed in the United States. Now, Americans have this really nasty habit of going for the quick buck instead of, developing things over time like you're supposed to. The result is an alienating league. It's one that feels like watching different McDonald's franchises compete with each other. Somebody wrote that in the comments here the other day. The problem is that you can't just import success. It takes time and effort. Number 2, believing its own hype. This syndicated article from 1977 blared out the hype. Soccer is the fastest growing team sport in America. Here's another one, this time from Manhattan, Kansas in 1996. Soccer is the fastest growing sport among children. Here's a very recent article in the Sports Business Journal proclaiming that soccer is still growing in the United States in 2024, despite the obvious growing popularity of pickleball. Okay, I'm not going to dive into the numbers. I'm not going to do some sort of scientific criticism. I really don't think that we have to. It's all hype and marketing, and really, it's always been hype and marketing. That is not hard to see. The problem, as you may have guessed, is that professional soccer in the United States doesn't exactly capture the hearts and imagination of kids these days. In fact, all professional sports have this problem. Alright, I've got 3 kids, none of them watch sports. All of them like Minecraft, Harry Potter, Roblox, things like that. Saying that soccer is more popular among young people than baseball is like saying that broccoli is more popular among young people than Brussels sprouts. Well, the problem is that people believed the hype. As a result, the old NASL expanded extremely quickly in the late 70s and early 80s. That attracted the sort of capital that follows these kind of overhyped trends. Yeah, you know, it's hard for me to read about the NASL and not think about the different collecting markets and other things that exploded in my lifetime. I mean, when I was a kid, everybody knew that baseball cards would make you rich someday. During COVID, as I recall, it was Magic the Gathering and Pokemon. It was meme stocks for a little while, or cryptocurrency. Now, you don't want anything in your economy to act like this, but you really don't want a sports league to act like this. Is it wise for Major League Soccer to expand to 30 teams? I suppose that time will tell. However, it's really hard for me to believe that we've learned from the mistakes of the NASL when we're making the same mistakes again. Number 3, using bizarre rules. Alright, this one really isn't a Major League Soccer problem, but it was a problem with professional soccer in the United States for a long time. For whatever reason, the old NPSL decided to change the point system. A win was now worth 6 points, a draw worth 3. Teams would also receive an additional point for each goal scored per game, with a maximum of 3 of these possible bonus points. I have absolutely no idea why they did this, and the worst part is that the NASL followed suit. This allowed teams that played poorly to sneak into the NASL playoffs, and it makes looking at the old standings really, really confusing. Now, the National Hockey League also used a point system at that time, and does today as well. In the NHL back then, it was 2 points for a win and 1 for a draw. Most of the world used 2 points for a win, of course, until England changed to 3 points in 1981. FIFA finally followed suit in 1995. Now, I understand this. The idea was that that extra point would promote offense, and that's also almost certainly why the American leagues decided to give 6 points for a win and a whole bunch of extra points for scoring goals. But geez, I mean, it's really kind of hard to follow a sport when you can't even read the standings. There were other rule changes, such as the famous 35-yard offside line, a confusing rule change that I don't think had much of an impact. The clock in the NASL ticked down, which just feels wrong. And we can also thank the NASL for the penalty shootout. Of course, the NASL's version of a penalty was different. It was modeled after hockey penalties in the NHL.
Greatest goal scorer. The big end shoots. Esposito makes the save.
In my opinion, those NASL penalties are a lot more fun to watch. But the other rules, yeah, you can forget about those. Number 4, playing in the wrong season. Okay, I know that this one is controversial, but hear me out. There is no reason to play soccer during the summertime. In fact, this forces soccer in the United States to compete with baseball for viewers. It is a losing proposition. There's no good way around this issue, by the way. No sport in America wants to compete with American football. American football owns Saturdays, which is college football, and Sundays, which is the NFL, in the fall. Friday nights tend to be reserved for high school football. That makes Fridays a difficult proposition as well. But the summer means going up against baseball. Baseball is a time-honored American tradition that isn't going anywhere anytime soon. Now, if you ask me, soccer would be wise to bite the bullet and go up against American football. As strange as it sounds, there are actually Americans who don't like the violence and the slow pace and the commercials of the game of American football. They say that weather is the problem. It snows in Montreal and Toronto, for example. Well, that's funny. It doesn't seem to stop the Canadian Football League, which has played in the snow and cold for well over a century. Number 5, Americanizing the sport. Okay, there are 2 points to make here. The first is one that I just alluded to. Some Americans like soccer because it's not that corporatized and it hasn't been that Americanized. Some of us like things that are a little bit different. The second point is that the sport has been stretched and bent to fit the will of American advertisers. If you watch old NASL games, you'll notice that the commercials come in at really awkward times.
No score in the game. This is Cosmos Soccer.
Okay, I'm clearly not in advertising or marketing. I clearly don't know what it is I'm talking about. But still, I have to wonder why in the world these television stations couldn't just save the ads for halftime or before the game or after the game and just charge the advertisers more for fewer slots. What's wrong with concentrating first on delivering a product that viewers want to see instead of concentrating first on the advertisers? This particular problem with soccer on television predated the NASL, by the way. Before it played its first game, the NPSL was dogged by rumors that referees were instructed to stall play to allow CBS to go to commercials. I've never seen proof that those rumors were true, but they continue to live on the NPSL Wikipedia page. That led to other annoying features of soccer broadcasts in America, such as this from the 1994 World Cup.
This segment of the game is presented commercial-free by Snickers.
I mean, seriously, could we not have at least something popular in the United States that isn't covered with advertisements and commercials? I remember that 1994 World Cup well. It was bizarre to hear people tell me about how some corporate sponsor gave me this segment of the game ad-free. Fortunately, those strange commercial breaks have gone away, but it still leaves a lingering bad taste to those of us who lived through it. Well, there you have it. Soccer in America has been like this for a century now, maybe a little bit more. Those running the sport have always tried to start from the top and make a quick buck as quickly as possible. They hyped the sport to a crazy level, and even worse, they believed their own hype and started to act on it. That's how the NASL fell. They totally screwed up the rules, they play the sport at the wrong time of year, and they insist on Americanizing the sport, which makes it almost unwatchable. Now, I'm still optimistic for the future, but as you've guessed, I really can't say that I appreciate the MLS.